So I've just completed my first 500 miles on the bike. So the break-in period, they tell you within the first 50 miles to not break 3,000 RPM. And then from 51 miles to 500, you can go to 3,500 RPM. So I was pretty confident that was going to be near impossible on this new bike. So one thing I did is I put the bike in rain mode. Mainly because my very first ride with it was in the rain. But I figured if I kept it in rain mode, it might help me keep those RPMs down as I went through the break-in period. So traditionally, in the Harley world, you would change your oil at the 500 mark. So you would change your oil, take a look at it, see if there's any metal floating around in it. Many folks would take their oil filter apart, cut it in half, and see if there's any significant metal fragments in there. Over time, Harley has moved that first service interval to 1,000 miles. And with the CVOs, they put synthetic oil in there. So that is way below the wear limit of that oil. So I wondered at the 500 mark, would I want to change the oil and at least take a look? But I hate to spend the money, especially with the synthetic oil. So then I thought, would it be possible to use one of these? So an inspection camera. If I put the inspection camera down in the engine case, could I see what the condition of the oil looks like? And could I see if there's any significant metal fragments? And maybe I could even find the drain plug. So as you can see here, it's pretty cloudy. You mostly see oil and the light is reflecting off the little bubbles in the oil, but it does look clear. So it's a lighter color still, new oil color, and I don't see any real significant metal fragments. But it's really hard to tell because the metal would be hanging out along the bottom. So I continued to run this camera around to see what I could find. Now this inspection camera comes with a magnetic tip. So I decided to attach that and run it back into the case and see if the magnet would collect any metal fragments. Well, it came back completely clear. But I think it was worth the experiment. So then I decided to put it down the transmission case. Let's take a look in there. Again, pretty much the same as with the main case. The oil is difficult to see anything, but it looks like new oil. But I did get to inspect the gears, and you could see that it looks pretty clean and the gears are very nice and new. So that was, if anything, fun to do. Switching over to the other side of the bike, took the primary cover off. One tip, if you take the primary cover off, especially on the Harley Davidsons when they narrowed the primary, you need to have the bike upright. If you take that cover off with it on the side stand, the oil's going to leak out because it leans over. So you're going to need to take that cover off. So I ran it in there, again, same result. Can't see a whole lot in the oil. You can see a little bit of the primary chain, but it was difficult to make the corner to really see the chain, see how it was wearing in. But it was a fun experiment either way. I decided then to take the spark plugs off. So I took the front spark plug off and the rear, just one of each, and put the camera down in to get a look at the cylinder heads. And you can see we do have carbon buildup. So the carbon buildup comes when oil escapes past the piston ring and then burns when it ignites, when the spark plug ignites the fuel, and it can burn oil on top of the cylinder head. This is something we are seeing with the Milwaukee 8s especially. And there are many videos about it and articles about it, about this carbon buildup on top of these cylinder heads. One of the thoughts is that it has to do with pressure in the cases. Well, with this new bike with the 121 cubic inch, they're now venting to the transmission through a long breather hose that goes from the air cleaner down to the transmission. Well, as you can see from my bike, with only 500 miles on it, there's a fair amount of carbon buildup. So I would say it's still an issue. I have not noticed any blow-by coming out the air cleaner, but with that giant plastic box, there is a lot of oil that could be stored in there before you notice it. Am I concerned about it? Not really. I think it's very normal for the Milwaukee 8s to have this carbon buildup. Is it a good thing? No. Is it a really bad thing? That's arguable. So it is what it is, but it was great to put this camera in there and get an early look. So I will plan to monitor it over time, especially as we get to 1,000 miles and beyond that, to see what happens with those cylinder heads. Does it continue to build up? Does it level off? We'll have these early photographs to compare that to. So a really great use of this inspection camera to look in those cylinder heads. So one thing to note when using an inspection camera, the end of the camera has a protective screw-on cover. And if this were to be loose, and you put this in your crankcase or your tranny or your primary, it could fall off. And this would then be in your motor. So not a good thing. Anytime you're gonna stick anything in your motor, note that if it's gonna fall off, it may happen. And then you're looking at some really expensive work to get that part out potentially. Same with this magnetic tip. The magnetic tip screwed on, so I was very careful with this not to jam it in there, not to jam it hard. And putting this camera, you can see this camera has a fairly long metal cover on the end, and it does make it difficult to get into a tight space with it. But don't jam it in there. You don't want to jam this in a gear or even be scraping along the bottom of your oil pan. Not a great idea. And with your cylinder heads have a crosshatch pattern in the cylinder walls. This helps with the movement of the piston ring up and down. You do not want this camera scratching your cylinder head at all. So I was very careful to only put this in far enough just to see past the spark plug holder. You can put your bike in 6th gear and you can rotate your rear tire. With the bike in a higher gear, it's easier to rotate that wheel. And I was able to rotate the wheel to lower the piston in the cylinder I was looking in to get a better look at the sidewall. So there it is, using an inspection camera to take a look inside your bike. It's a pretty neat little experiment. So I'll put a link to this camera in the description if you want to check it out. So the bike is broken in. I could finally take it out of rain mode. And let me tell you, what a difference. It's louder and way faster. A lot more fun to ride. So I'll be coming out with a video on the 1,000-mile service. We'll go through that together. But until next time, in the friction zone.